Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Albany Law School, and it really is my pleasure to get things started here on the inauguration week for our 19th President and Dean. We're so glad that you're here for the panel. We hope that you'll join us again tomorrow, and I'm going to do the short intro today and save the long intro for tomorrow, Dean. But we do have the great pleasure of introducing you to our 19th President and Dean, Cinnamon Carlarne.
Jeff, did you say inauguration week? I'm not sure what that entails. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome you to Albany Law School and to today's conversation about leadership. Albany Law School really prides itself on advancing a vision of legal education that embraces the idea that lawyers have an important role to play as leaders in society. And more importantly, that leadership is something that can be taught, and that law school is a place where we should be very kind of intentionally thinking about how to nurture and how to prepare our next generation of lawyers and leaders. And across Albany Law School's very long history, almost 175 years, we're coming up on our anniversary, we've really created a legacy of past leaders and present leaders. You probably saw some of them walking through the law school on the banners, including Judge Stein right here and Justice Gary right here. They're actually all over the place in the room today. But from presidents and Supreme Court justices to the current mayor of the city of Albany, to dozens of sitting judges, to the Secretary of Agriculture, to United States attorneys, and the Chief U.S. Probation Officer right here, Albany Law alumni serve in critical leadership roles across all aspects of our society. But being a leader is not just something that happens by virtue of being a lawyer, even an Albany Law lawyer. It's something that we really must create space and opportunity for, that we must nurture, and that we should constantly be interrogating in terms of what it means to be a good leader in this particular moment in which we live. And that's our goal here today, to explore what leadership means, how leaders evolve, and how we can individually and collectively do more to create space and opportunity and mentorship for our next generation of lawyers and leaders. And I truly cannot imagine a more exceptional group of people to explore these themes with. In a moment, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists individually, but I want to first say a word about their collective experience and expertise. As a group, Maxine, Rob, and Kathy have navigated some of the greatest challenges of our time, from climate change to our criminal justice system to the fundamental questions of how to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in legal education, in environmental policy, and in criminal policy. And they've done so really in a very challenging, polarized society. So some of the greatest challenges you can imagine. And they've also done so with incredible grace, grit, persistence, and success. I have to say that when I reached out to Rob, Maxine, and Kathy to ask them to participate in today's panel, it was kind of like a set of dream asks. I honestly never imagined that we'd be able to be so lucky to have each of them be able to be here and to say yes to being here. But at the same time, I'm also not surprised that each of them said yes, because they're all leaders who are committed to learning, to community, to public service, and to showing up to really help ensure that we do all we can to make sure that law operates as a force of good for justice and equity in society. And so now it's my pleasure to get to briefly introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll dive into our conversations. So first, Kathy Northern, Dean Kathy Northern. Kathy Northern is the Associate Dean for Inclusive Excellence and the Jones Day Robert M. Duncan Designated Associate Professor of Law at the Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law. People here correct me when I don't get it right. So, Kathy's been a professor there since 1991. And I won't go into too much personal detail here, except to say that Kathy has truly been one of the greatest mentors and friends I could possibly imagine. So she currently serves as the Associate Dean for Inclusive Excellence, and she also represents the law school to the to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Leaders and Advocates Group, and also serves on the university's working group on inclusive excellence. She has also served as the Associate Dean for Admissions and the Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs at Ohio State. She truly is just the heart of the school. Dean Northern teaches in the areas of tort law, poverty law, products liability, and environmental justice. She serves on the board of Law and Leadership Institute, which is a pipeline program for underrepresented and under-resourced high school students, and she's been deeply involved with this pipeline program since its inception in 2008. It was one of the first programs of its kind, and it's incredibly successful. We've seen some of those students actually go through the whole cycle now, and it's amazing. Dean Northern received her JD from Harvard Law School, her BA in Political Science, and BS in Psychology from Williams College, so she actually spent time just down the road. And next we have Professor Maxine Burkett. Maxine is a professor of law at the University of Hawaii, but she's currently serving as the Assistant Director for Climate, Ocean, and Equity in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And she's only very recently also finished serving as a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School's Department of Global Health and Social Medicine, where she advanced research on climate justice and public health. And from January 2022 through July of 2023, Maxine serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oceans, Fisheries, and Polar Affairs in the Department of State's Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. Environmental offices always have really long titles.
Yeah.
We love our acronyms.
An acronym.
Yeah.
Yeah, alphabet soup.
Wish.
Prior to that appointment, she also served as an expert senior advisor to Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. Before joining the Biden administration, Maxine served on numerous commissions, states, and federal committees, and I've had the opportunity to work with her on some of those, and truly a leader in the field, really since the beginning. So it's such a pleasure to have her here. And I will also say that in common with Dean Northern, Professor Burkett went to Williams College. So we have a lot of themes here. And then we went to Berkeley Law together. Yeah. How could I forget that? We went to Berkeley Law together. Our third panelist is someone who many of you might know, Robert Capers. So Rob, of course, is the Chief United States Probation Officer for the Eastern District of New York, and he does, in fact, have a banner somewhere, so it's a trick to go find it. And he's a court unit executive within the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, which includes Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, as well as Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island. He's responsible for overseeing a staff of approximately 90 different federal probation officers and staff. Prior to his appointment as Chief Probation Officer in 2019, Rob was a partner in the New York City office of Aaron Fox. But he began his career in the Eastern District in 2003 and served as a trial AUSA there. And he was in general crimes, narcotics, and the violent crimes and terrorism section. And I have to tell you, your titles kind of equal the environment and length, right? He also served as
acronyms for them, though.
You have acronyms? You don't?
Yes, we do.
Helpful.
Yeah, well, we try. He also served as acting deputy chief of the general crimes section, deputy chief and chief of the narcotics section, and the International Narcotics Strike Force, among many other roles. But also a really important piece of Rob's incredible service history and leadership history. On October 8th, 2015, Rob was nominated by former President Barack Obama to be the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. On the same day, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch appointed Mr. Capers to this position in an interim capacity, and then he was confirmed in December 2015 and took the oath of office in 2016. So as you can see, just from those, by the way, super brief bios compared to what we could have shared, there's a huge commonality here in terms of vast leadership experience, commitment to public service, and kind of just excellence. And so with that, I want to turn it over to our conversation and let the folks we really want to hear from talk. Okay, so I have just a kind of opening question that I'd like to throw out to each of you. And the question is really kind of just, what does leadership mean to you? And how have you evolved as a leader over the course of your career? And in thinking this through, I think we would be interested to hear about the challenges and opportunities of being a lawyer in your particular field, each of which is different, and perhaps any pivotal moments that have shaped your vision of leadership. And Kathy, I'll start with you.
Well, President Carlarne, I have to get used to that. It has such a lovely ring to
Did you
it.
hear that? My daughter wanted to hear that.
I want to thank you for the kind words and for the invitation. This was an absolute pleasure and honor to be able to come and share this time with you. In terms of, I think, my concept of leadership, especially in the context of an educational field, it's really a servant leader. I'm there, we are, we're training individuals to go out and be of service to the community, to the profession, to the country. And I think you really have to think about what that means. Different leaders may have different goals, but when you're in a position like that in education, it's really about serving the students that you have, the broader community that they'll go out into, and of course, your colleagues, your faculty and staff. And so for me, that means asking questions of yourself first. One, why is it that I should be in this position of leadership? What is it that I can bring to the enterprise that will benefit the institution that I'm working for? So answering for yourself, kind of that why question. Then that question, the answer to that question, I think, has to be tailored to the nature of the enterprise that you're engaged in. And the why has to be one that you can kind of use as your North Star as you go through a lot of unexpected things that can happen over the course of a day or of a year or of your career. I think you also have to understand your own overall priorities and will my role, will my service in this context support those roles. For diversity, equity, and inclusion has been something that has been critically important to me throughout my professional career. And each of those roles that you talked about, whether it's admissions, student affairs, what I currently do, had that as a recognition, especially as a state institution that's focused on access. How can I serve that capacity? What am I hoping to accomplish in these goals? If you don't have goals, if you don't have ideas of what it is that you want to do in a particular job or position, you can't be successful at it. And you're in an educational institution, those goals are set by the university, they're set by the president, they're set by the public, they're set by a number, but you kind of have to have an idea of where you want to go with that, and can you work within the context. And as you mentioned, I think all of those things evolve over time. One of the challenges in the course of changing from those different types of positions really was in the DEI space, because at the time, in 2015, when I moved into that space, there weren't any kind of really similar, there were maybe only 2 or 3 people who held a similar position in law schools across the country. And so it was kind of not being able to just look at what somebody else did. It's starting to try and establish the infrastructure. And as a leader, I think an infrastructure that will be there long after you leave. I think as a leader, if things will only work while you're there, then you've not done a really good job as a leader, because you haven't developed that infrastructure, you haven't developed the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. You've done that, I have to say.
Still working on it.
Yes, and still evolving, that's right. Rob, what about you?
So, first of all, thank you for having me here. It is an honor as always. I want to tell everybody from the start that there's going to be no crying today, because my son is finishing up an exam today in North Carolina, so there's no sneaking him in the side door or anything like that. So you had to be here.
I'm gathering.
It was great.
Yeah.
So what does leadership mean to me? Leadership to me means not only more important than developing myself, particularly in the service space. When you commit to serving for a lifetime, you serve something that's greater than yourself, and I serve within the criminal justice system. And so it is recognizing where I stand in that system. I am, as an African-American male, in a system that has proliferated the mass incarceration of African-American men and people of color. It is important to be transparent and an honest broker, and appearing and acting in a way that kind of puts you above the fray, right? It is kind of recognizing where you stand in every space. And when I came out of law school, I thought that meant, one thing, right? How you dress, how you carry yourself, how you everything else. But as I evolved in this space, I realized how weighty the position was. And as I waited my turn to become a leader in that space, law enforcement is different than other spaces. It's very regimented. And I was raised in a system where you toil away in the vineyard until somebody taps you and says, it's your time. And Mary is shaking her head because she kind of came up in that same system in the DA's office. And so I had an opportunity to see those before me lead, and some of them not lead very well. And it was trying to make an effort to be the counter to those people who were not leading well. And as I evolved in this space and became a supervisor in the U.S. Attorney's Office and began to teach people the philosophy behind what we do and how we do it, I had to be able to not only present the example, but give people the space to, once they had those expectations, grow in that space and not be so overbearing. Right? So that's the kind of the evolution, I think, for me in the leadership space. And as I transition into the area of community corrections, and a space that I didn't know much about, it further evolves because you move from being a lawyer with other lawyers in the space where you can set expectations and lawyers are high-functioning people, to now working with people who are career law enforcement officers who know that they can do their modicum of time for a period of years and then they can retire and everything else. And it is trying to learn how to lead in that space. And so leadership for me is something that is ever evolving, much like it is in the academic space. And having the ability to recognize that and operate in that space so that you can lead in a way that people will not only follow, but will want to grow, and whether it's uncomfortable or not, grow into a space where they could kind of not only meet but exceed, particularly when in the space that we operate in, there are lives that are always held in the balance, whether it's the public that we protect or the people who become justice involved, and now we are supervising and trying to give them the second chance to be law-abiding citizens, or the families who are affected by either crime or the collateral consequences of having a family member who is justice involved.
Maxine.
Yeah, no, thank you. I want to first say that it's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. And part of the reason I said yes so quickly is because it's you, Cinnamon, really.
Yes.
What an amazing moment this is, where this law school has the opportunity to have your leadership at this time. And I have certainly been inspired by your work and the way you've led in the academic space and in even more informal spaces where it's important for our voices that aren't lifted up to be lifted up. So anytime you call, thank you. I'll be here. Echoing everything that's been said, and just maybe honing in on something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is this leadership as the I, the we, and the it, right? So understanding and tending to each of those as component parts of ensuring successful outcomes, especially when today we are dealing with some of the greatest collective action problems probably in human history. And so when I think about any sort of assessment of leadership, I'm thinking about, am I good? Is the individual, it's everything from self-care to ensuring that you're, managing your energy, to ensuring your students aren't burning out or are okay. So, and that they understand that they can ask that question first in order to be effective. And then also understanding what one has to offer uniquely. And for me in this space, for example, of environmental justice and climate justice, a lot of what I think I was able to contribute was making connections and then bridging communities. And so describing that as an example for students, for example, would be, what are the ways that we're maybe not seeing how various problems actually share some component elements? When I was younger, I was talking a lot about lead to prison pipelines. What is the state of our community? How are we setting our children up for success or failure? And making that connection was a slightly different way to think about it, but one, I think that was an important contribution. Also, at the time, in the 80s and 90s especially, I was rabble-rousing really young, and certainly by high school, trying to make the argument that where I grew up in Queens was also an environment, and make that argument to large environmental organizations and to colleges that had very stellar environmental programs that didn't seem to understand that there were urban environments as well. And so speaking to various communities to say we have shared concerns. And so that was one way that I thought, okay, this is the contribution I can make. And I tried to cultivate that in my career. In terms of the we, this again is about understanding if each of us is, are we good? Are you good? Because we need to do this together. And am I open to all the ways in which you are at your best and have your own unique talents and skills to offer? And so listening and lifting people up has been key. I feel as though my time in Hawaii in particular was very powerful for this. Having the humility to understand that I was an outsider, that I'm from Jamaica originally, so I felt like I was always very keen and aware of the post-colonial experience, but then in some ways I was part of a settler colonial experience there. The values of listening, the values of understanding, that's actually the most powerful thing to do is to continue to learn and to ensure that you're lifting people up in service of the community, in service of the we. Another way I've seen that manifest is in the context of the federal government, respecting diverse perspectives, not making assumptions about who is the expert in the room. I am forever in awe of the talented and indispensable bureaucrat that often gets derided, who has decades of experience that if we recognize and, again, lift up and leverage, we can make incredible impact and long-term impact, right? As a political appointee as well, one of the big questions is how to future-proof whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of that is making sure that you're doing it in a way that makes sense to those who will take this forward, that they feel a part of, that's been collaboratively designed and defined. And then, of course, you can imagine the we in the community in the classroom. So I'll just assume that that's what we're all doing here at the law school. And then lastly, the it, right? Again, biggest challenges. And I've been working a lot on what we are now calling the triple crises of climate, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And they all have some root causes there. And if we really get to that understanding that the root of what those root causes are, oftentimes through gleaning the expertise of the diverse community that you've pulled together, there's a lot of opportunity there for that collective action, for the trust building, for emphasis in solidarity. In my academic work, oftentimes informed by your great work, Cinnamon, as well, looking over the horizon to see what these key issues are, given that these are massive collective action issues and without precedent, thinking about what it means for a country to lose its habitable territory, what migration means in that context, how we repair, what's just over the horizon, how can we see farther together. And then in the front office context and the government context, again, applying varied techniques to ensure that you are, again, building that kind of trust and solidarity to make some big decisions and big policy shifts in order to have the impact at scale. I'll pause there.
I have to say, just kind of selfishly, working with Maxine in this space of kind of around climate change, environmental pollution, justice for a number of years, it can be very, very frustrating and very challenging. And just hearing your approach and knowing that you're in there and doing this good work gives me so much optimism and so much faith that we're going to keep making progress. But speaking of challenges, we really do live in a time of great polarization. It's hard to imagine, as Maxine said, a more difficult time when kind of getting together and affecting change is more difficult. So the degree of polarization, the depth of the challenges we face, and also changes in how we access information make it very challenging to communicate and really challenging to lead across generational political and social divides. I think we see this here in the law school and elsewhere. What advice do you have for young leaders, any leaders, but perhaps are thinking about our students here, about how to lead across generational, political, and social divides? And perhaps we'll mix up our order. And Maxine, do you want to start?
Okay, sure. And I'll be briefer. But I mean, again, I think the big part of this is the deep listening and the trust building. But I am under no illusion that, I can walk into any room and establish trust in those spaces. And so one thing that I've been thinking about a lot in the context of the polarization, well, I mean, I think, again, if you're focused on building community, if you're listening deeply, if you're providing, if you are walking into a situation where you are assuming goodwill, those are good starting points. It doesn't always work, as we've seen, and in fact, I think DC is the perfect example of that. But I have been thinking a lot about cultural vouchers, about people who are the right messengers, and empowering them and lifting them up and supporting them in the ways that are most effective. Yeah. Because again, I might not be the right advocate, right? And I mean that in a number of ways, which is to say what I'm talking about, whether it's climate, whether it's immigration, these aren't things that have, that are divorced from, very partisan impulses, unfortunately. And so then the question is, who is a better trusted messenger and advocate? How do we create a safe space for that conversation to happen? And then I think if we are able to build that, then it really comes down to a joint problem definition and fact finding. And what I mean by that is that if we, sometimes it's about what's the root issue that we're trying to solve here? What's the problem that we are actually seeking to resolve? I think especially as we understand better data, for example, about where public opinion is with respect to climate change, I think we're getting more clarity on a shared problem definition. And we're getting better at the fact-finding around that. And then once we can at least say this is what we're doing, then we can argue about the solutions. But that's a very different argument and probably, hopefully, doesn't strike at your identity, right? Or something that seems much more core. So being very precise about that, and this is where actually I would just say, I think lawyers are really good at this, even if even if we become more abstract in our academic careers or whatever it is, or in our practice, we don't think so, but we're very good at sort of saying, well, what's the first step here? And then what's the next element? And is it an and or an or? We can be very, I now see that my daughter is A-B-C-ing everything too, right? Yeah. So that's the issue. It's really, let's carve out this process and create space for that so that we can argue actually about maybe the solutions, but not the very thing, the very challenge itself.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about talking across generational, political, and social divides? You've had some experience, I think.
So I have, and I'm living it in the space that I'm in now, and largely the generational divide. I have a department that's ever evolving with 20-plus-year vets on one side and people who were born in 1995 and 1996, and it's working to try to find common ground. And so the first thing I try to impart on these folks is what I learned in law school, which is words matter. And words matter and how you approach them, And so to the emerging leaders, I in my department, and I would say even to our leaders here, is slow down and give yourself the ability to learn what that means to lead. It won't take decades like it took us dinosaurs, you all think, because they move at a faster pace than us, but they still have to slow down and recognize the value of words and the commonality that people have, right? I have young people who don't see the value of certain processes until they realize the effect that what they're doing has on the people that they're supervising, who have come home from periods of incarceration and feel like they've served their debt to society and don't want to be talked down to And because they're just some of my young people are very abrupt because that's how they have learned to communicate in the digital age, where they don't actually engage in conversation, their text messages and things like that. We're trying to teach them the value of words. And for my senior people, we're trying to remind them that what worked all of those years doesn't necessarily resonate now. And so it is bringing people from over here and over here to the middle so that they can understand and appreciate and respect each other. And that's where diversity and diversity of opinion and diversity of upbringing on everything matters. The suburban kids that I hire from Nassau and Suffolk County have had a different experience than the people who grew up in Brooklyn and Queens, some of whom who grew up in the same streets with some of the folks that we've supervised. And so it is bringing those people together for the common good, right? Because it's not about us, it is about the people that we are serving. And it is finding that commonality in a way that manifests itself so that we could best serve our community and turn out these folks in a way where they are feeling lifted up, not beaten down upon throughout this period of supervision that they're on, so that they could go out and grow. And recognizing that, but for the grace of God, there go I, for some of us. And people lose that, right? So it's having hard and honest discussions with people. It is recognizing, and for me, it is choosing every word wisely and being able to apologize if the words don't come across right or if the message is not right. Saying, I got that wrong. Because that is an essential part of leadership. You have to own it when you didn't get it right.
Absolutely. Kathy, I know that you live and breathe this.
Occasionally. So I think, first of all, I would encourage someone to take the step you were talking about and identify yourself in a way. What are your social identities? What are the things that have influenced how you think, how you approach conversations? What are the factors, whether you grew up in an urban area or a rural area, your ethnicity, your parents' teachings, all these kind of things help form our social identities. And the tendency is then to see everything through the lens that we're familiar with. And I think it's important in any conversation, but especially in polarized conversations, to recognize that other people have come through a range of different experiences that you're talking about and are bringing all those to the table. And if you're not thinking about how those factors influence your own thinking and how they can influence others, you're more talking at each other than you are actually having a conversation. And I think especially as law students, especially as lawyers, we have relied a lot and focused a lot on developing our intellect. And not necessarily recognizing that emotional intelligence and social intelligence are as important, if not more important, when you're actually working with people, right? The intellect's fine when you're reading, when you're going to go do your exam. But if you're engaged with people, especially when there may be emotional and other kinds of ties in the conversation, you have to develop those skills. And you can actually go out and find out what emotional intelligence is, what those skills are. We're talking about listening. There's a difference between hearing and listening, and we tend to hear when we're in a conversation, but we're hearing so we can figure out what we can say next, and not actually trying to understand what that person's saying, the context that they are saying it, how personal is the issue to them. Is this a theoretical debate in some sense, or is this something that is deeply personal and has happened in their own life? And so that developing those listening skills, understanding those those are the first aspects of leadership, not just for polarized conversations, but to be able to work with, as you said, a broad group of people who come from a wide range of backgrounds. You have to develop those other skills. And so I think that's the first thing I would say to those of us who as a law professor, spend a lot of time drilling the intellectual piece, right, into you. We don't spend a lot of time on the other soft skills, although the other soft skills are the ones that are really most important to being an advocate for someone, for being a counselor, for being someone to help solve their problems. So that's where I would start out, is to really think about how can I holistically develop who I am so that I can holistically approach the conversations that I have and understand the context in which I'm engaging.
Yeah, emotional intelligence, social awareness, self-awareness, and as Maxine was talking about earlier, just awareness of how one is. You know, am I okay? What is my emotional health? What is my mental well-being? And does that matter? Of course it matters. And these are the things that I think in law school we're trying to be more mindful of as we think about, again, the next generation of lawyers and the next generation of leaders, is how to kind of do the listening we need to do to be real parts of conversation and to take care of ourselves at the same time. So that absolutely resonates. I'm going to just shift it up a little bit and ask you to think about another leader. So really to ask you to share an example of a leader whose work has inspired you, and really to kind of explore what this tells us about your philosophy of leadership and what you think makes a successful leader, and why. And mine is, when I get this question, it's always Wangari Maathai, who is amazing. We can come back to that. But I'm going to ask Rob now to be the first. We're shifting up the first roles.
So, when I thought of that question initially, I thought of my predecessor, Loretta Lynch, who became the first African-American woman to be the Attorney General for the United States. And then I began to think about a colleague of mine in the community corrections system, and I want to really talk about him because Loretta was a trailblazer on a lot of levels nationally, but I have developed a newfound respect for this gentleman because he's doing so much locally. He is the chief probation officer in the District of Minnesota. He came to that position wanting to really work to empower the people that his office was supervising. And one of the things that he realized is that people, because folks in Minnesota were disenfranchised from voting after their convictions and were not able to vote until they completed their term of supervision and paid their fines and everything, he began to really work with the local legislators and the legislature in Minnesota so that they would bring legislation that allowed returning citizens to be able to vote so long as they were in good standing in their term of supervision. And when I think about the headwinds that he was facing in that state, because there were people who felt that folks, even after they completed their terms of supervision, had not paid their full debt to society, I look at the fearlessness with which he went head-to-head with those folks, going on talk shows, making it a newsworthy event such that there was enough pressure put on people in the legislature to begin to bring a movement afoot that allowed for that legislation to pass. And then he began a voter registration drive throughout the state of Minnesota for returning citizens both federally and locally. It was the inability for him to not take no for an answer. And not only not take no for an answer, but push people in the right way for a cause that was just. That is instructive for me because life in the community corrections level is life out of the spotlight. Right? When you think of law enforcement, especially federal law enforcement, you think of the forward-facing law enforcement agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, and the work that is done there. But when you think about the unsung heroes who kind of do the dirty work that allows for people to feel validated and allows them to get that shot in the arm that they need to say, I matter. That is, I think, for me, the greater measure of the leader now. And that's part of the evolution. It is seeing the people who do the work day by day on the ground and are leading from where they stand. That I think, and that's not to say that Loretta Lynch, who I absolutely love and revere, is not who she is. It is just that having functioned on that level, where I was leading from where I was up above there, I thought that was the standard until I came down to the ground and I saw the people every day that are creating change that percolates up to the top and allows folks who are leading from up here to lead a charge. Yeah. And so when I think about that, and I think about the concept of leadership, it is that folks need to understand that they can lead from wherever they are. And from wherever they are, they can create a change and a ripple effect that will percolate up and that will do so much good that is unknown to folks up here, but the everyday folks. And it is those people who learn to lead from where they are that develop into the leaders of tomorrow that become even greater.
I think that's such a great message. It's not only kind of hard work and starting from where you are, but it's also kind of thinking about the existing kind of hierarchies of power and saying you don't have to be here to make a change. You can start here and really make progress and change. I really appreciate that. Maxine, do you want to jump in?
I can. And it's probably a great place to jump in just because I find this question to be so difficult in the ways that, that like, who would you like to have dinner with past, and you're like, I mean, I don't know, they're like 1,000 people, and I was really struggling with this, and so I may just give the laundry list and sort of identify the thing that's sort of, because in all the ways that you were describing, there is leadership on the playground to the community neighborhood meeting that is just transformative. And I think that doesn't always get seen, but is actually super essential, especially because I think we are going to really understand and appreciate how hyperlocal a lot of our solutions will continue to be moving forward. But as I was thinking about it, I've had a lot of really phenomenal women supervisors who've come before me. My law dean at University of Hawaii, Camille Nelson, is incredible in terms of recognizing leadership at all levels and honing that and providing opportunity. Our CEQ chair, Brenda Mallory, is this phenomenal lawyer who has been in a couple of administrations now, egoless, incredible mentor, incredibly kind. Secretary Holland of Interior, just seeing the humanity in everyone, understanding past, present, and future, and leading in that way. My kids, I have to say, my son, because he is he's very clear-eyed about what he thinks is right or wrong, and he's not preachy about it. He's just sort of like, no, I don't think that's the best for all. My daughter, who I will never forget, when she said, how do I know that this is right versus you just telling me that this is right? And it wasn't like I'm telling her to do something. It was like, what are our family values? What do we, and she was sort of like, I get that this is our value, but how do we know it's right? That questioning. I thought was really, I was like, it'll be fine, we've done our job.
Karen, take over.
Amazing.
That's right.
She's asking me, how do you know that that's true? Malala, for her incredible sense of humor. She's brilliant, she's phenomenal, all of the things. But in spite of it all, right? She's this incredible sense of humor. And it is humbling and inspiring. I could go on, but those are samples.
Fantastic. Kathy.
For me, it's Nancy Rogers. And Nancy was an an associate dean when I was young and just kind of maybe 4 or 5 years in. And I remember being on a committee with her, and we were coming down the stairs, and she said, you know, you need to think about, you know, you'd be a good administrator. And I laughed uproariously, thinking, I thought you had pretty good judgment up to now, but I don't really know what you're thinking about. But it's that ability to think about someone else and look into the future and encourage them to open up their eyes to what the possibilities are. I mean, I think as teachers, we're supposed to do that with all of our students, or at least try to do that. But Nancy not only, I think, worked at identifying possibilities, but she helped, we talked about nurturing. She helped to nurture in so many different ways. Sometimes it was just asking questions, sometimes it was providing guidance, sometimes it was, you know, providing encouragement. Sometimes it was just saying, here's something I know you can do, even if you're not sure that you can do it, so get it done. You know, that push that a leader does, all with the notion, again, of building people who can follow in your steps, because you're not always going to be there. You're not always going to be able to make that decision. And the Law and Leadership program that Cinnamon referenced was one that it works with students from Columbus City Schools from 9th through 12th grade. And it's a summer-long program, but actually it's a year-long program that focuses on preparing students for college. She's concerned about the pipeline into law school for diverse groups. And she said, you know, the pipeline has to start earlier. And just, she brought together the 9 law schools, the Supreme Court, and a number of other constituencies to make that dream a reality. And I think that's what I admire most about her. And she's continued to do that, not just in her role as dean, but what she's done with Divided Communities Project is looking at how to resolve a lot of the issues. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you know, really community issues, policing issues, and others. And just that she is the most humble, quiet, non-assuming person that you'd ever want to know. But her impact is just incredible. And so for me, sometimes you think about a leader as somebody who's up front being, you know, very assertive, you know, you have to follow me. She's one of those people who just, whether she's in a position of leadership or not, is the consummate leader in terms of bringing people together, helping them to achieve, to see, have a vision for a common goal, and getting them there.
And for those of you who don't know Nancy, she was the first female dean at Ohio State? Yeah, so she was the first female dean at the law school. She was also Solicitor General, or Attorney General for the state of Ohio.
She was the interim Attorney General for the state of Ohio when our Attorney General got kicked out.
That's right.
And she was brought in, and this is another aspect of her. She, in a sense, is a true neutral.
Yeah.
She is someone who can listen. You know, she has her own very clear set of values and understandings, but she's someone who can bring together people to have those conversations.
Yeah.
If you ever want to have a difficult conversation,
Absolutely.
That's who you want leading it.
And she now helps lead a group, the Divided Communities Project, which that is all that they do, really. They think about how to bring people together, how to enable conversations, how to really do real listening and growing together. I know Nancy, I want to know all of the other people, especially the kids, I have to say. All right, so maybe...
The person that I didn't say that I feel
yes.
acknowledge is Justice Jackson.
Justice Jackson, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I need to say.
Well, maybe I'll add one thing to that. So when I was first starting out my legal academic career, and I was at the University of South Carolina, I think I was in my first year there, and so it was my first commencement ceremony, and Justice Sotomayor was a surprise guest. And Justice Sotomayor, she was just, I think it was just at the very beginning of when she was starting her term. We had a awards ceremony for students, an honors ceremony. And of course, once word got out that Justice Sotomayor was going to be there, all of the faculty turned up too, right? They would come anyway, I'm sure. But what was really amazing about her, and I think there's a number of amazing things about her, is that she did not, it's not that she was rude, but she did not pay attention to the faculty. She went around to every single student and spent time with every single student, and that's where her focus was. And it was just this incredible focus on listening, on emotional intelligence, and on thinking about leadership where you are. And so I'd love to add her to that list too. Maybe now we can take, I know we're running short on time, but we have a phenomenal group of folks here that I'm sure people might have some questions for. Are there any questions that we can take from, Isabella. So Isabella is herself already a leader and is going to be a great future leader. She is our student trustee, and she is really one of the kind of the beating hearts of our student body. So Bella, please.
And in the fall, she will be an assistant district attorney in the Kings County DA's office.
No way.
And asking if that's been true in your experience, but is that more depends on the type of leader you are, and just your thoughts generally on that?
I mean, I guess I'll speak to that first. I don't think that's true, but I think it depends upon what kind of leader you are. You may have a leader who feels that they have to distance them, that there needs to be a hierarchy, that they have to distance themselves in order to have the authority to be a leader. And in many ways, I don't think you have to have authority to be a leader. You have to be able to have vision, to have focus and other things, and to relate. Often the authority comes because you are a leader, not the reverse, right? But I think you have to be always cognizant of, are people around you because they want to be, because those are your people, right? That's your circle. Or are they around you because of the status that you hold? It can be very lonely if the only reason people actually want to be around you is because of the status that you hold. Because if that ever comes into question or is shaky, then they can disappear very quickly. So part of that is not to lose, for the people who are really your compatriots, your colleagues, to maintain those connections even as you move up, right? Sometimes you can want to develop, and that doesn't mean you can't develop other connections. It means you don't necessarily forget the ones that have been there and steadfast with you, from the beginning.
Do you want to go? Well, I think that's right. And I was thinking, though, it can be lonely if you're trying to change something. Mm-hmm. And if there is a lot of energy and inertia behind the thing that you're trying to change. And if there's a lot of buy-in and vested interests. And that's a different kind of loneliness than maybe what you're asking about, but I would be mindful of the fact that with greater leadership, it comes a capacity to make change or to continue doing what everyone's been doing. But the kind of innovative leadership that we probably need right now will mean that sometimes things will be lonely. And you will have to make tough decisions or do things that may seem impossible. And I would say that those have been, there have been some tough times in that regard. But there, there's always someone else that's maybe suffering in silence until you find each other. And when you do, it's really powerful, and it's the beginning of something even more powerful. So I just want to acknowledge that it can happen, but you're probably not as alone as you think you are. And then once you have that kind of network and partnership, there's a good strategy and innovation that comes out of that.
So I think my answer is a hybrid of both of theirs. I think it really depends on what your field is. In my field, I think that it gets increasingly lonelier because on some level you have to have a separation from the people that you, in a law enforcement context, there's a emphasis on supervisors and chain of command. And part of being a good leader is giving your command staff the ability to do their job. So I define what the expectations are for my executive team. I'm the chief probation officer. I have an operations deputy, which is my first deputy. So if I'm not available, she steps in and becomes what they call my alter ego. I have 2 assistant deputy chiefs that run our 2 divisions, pre-sentence division and our supervision division. And then I have a line of supervisors that, if you think in the police context, those are my sergeants who are in the street with the folks. And so in my world, it is important to allow people to lead where they are, and that's how you develop them. So you define expectations and you let them do their jobs without fear that the boss is going to be standing over them every step along the way and saying, what are you doing? What is this? What is that? And so there's a built-in loneliness that comes from that, right? And also I'm the arbiter of any kind of disciplinary dispute or anything else that comes. And so there has to be an appearance of impartiality. So I can't spend every day sitting at lunch with everybody and talking to them and doing all of that, right? And so as you ascend in the world of law enforcement, it becomes by necessity more of an isolationist position depending on where you are, because you have to let those under you do their jobs. That doesn't mean that that's how you have to define yourself as a leader. Right? That means that you have to still be able to come and spend time with folks, targeted time where they can see that you are a human being and a person who has feelings and whose walk is no different than theirs, right? So I talk about how expensive my son's tuition is, and you know, my daughter's sweet 16 that's going to cost me an arm and a leg, and you know, whatever else, so that they have a sense that just because I'm the chief doesn't mean that I don't have a life outside of this, and my life doesn't mirror theirs. And so it is trying to find that constant balance. Right? You're going to go to the Kings County DA's office, you're rarely going to see your DA. And if you do, you're going to have one of those moments. What's he doing here? Until he begins to talk to you. And you see, okay, he's a decent guy. And so that kind of necessarily has to happen in the world. But you, again, still get to define who you are and how you interact with your folks so that they recognize that you're a person and that you care. And that gives them some sense that if something goes wrong, they're going to get a fair shake or a benefit of the doubt because they understand that the human condition.
Any other questions? Yes.
Help set themselves up to be successful leaders.
Everybody was looking at you, Kathy.
Okay.
Come on, boss.
In part, I think, by not focusing on what can you do right now to become a good leader. I think it's also there's almost no position that you're in as a leader that you're not also a follower, right? That you're not having someone that you report to, that you have to work with, and other things. And so developing who you are in a broad sense, you know, I was talking about emotional and other intelligence before then, so that you know what your vision is, you know what your values are, you know the priorities in your life, if it's family, if it's whatever it is, that you have these things very solidly in place before you think about being a leader. Because if you don't have those things about yourself solidly in place, it's easy for people to persuade you one way or the other, or push you one way or the other, because you think in order to be a leader, you have to, have followers. And sometimes the desire to have followers causes people to say things, to do things, to go in directions, because that's where they think the followers want them to be, as opposed to having a core set of values and vision that you've examined very closely and know why you have them. And it's not just because somebody else told you these are good, right? To have that core in yourself and have it settled and strong. And then when the winds come, when other people are saying, no, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that, you always want to listen to other people, because we're human, we are wrong, and often frequently wrong. You need to be able to hear that, but if you have that core, then you at least have something to question yourself about, is the direction that I want to go one that meets my goals, my values, but also the goals and values of whatever organization is or whatever it is that you're doing. So that's, having that strong center or core first, and then the rest will come.
I might add, just because I think we do need to think about leadership in the 21st century context. And so there might be a couple of different ways to think about it. So instead of like, I've aced all my classes and passed the bar with flying colors, it's also about understanding how to lead in a context of uncertainty, right? Being an agile thinker, creative, always looking around the corner as to what might be coming. And obviously I would be thinking about that because I do climate work and biodiversity, but a pandemic could come around again, or you could have all sorts of things that I think will define this century in some meaningful ways, and they provide opportunities, they crack open opportunities, even if they're obviously very devastating in the moment. So it's also about just the sort of skills that you would hopefully pick up in the community of law school versus the class, necessarily just the classroom of a law school.
Yes and yes. I think the thing I say to young people, and the lawyers especially, is slow down so that you can learn to become fundamentally sound, so that you can learn to be a good person, because you can be fundamentally sound and an agile thinker and everything else, but if you're not a good person, that shines through, and that grounds you, meaning grounds your ascent as a leader. And if you're a good person, then you can look to find the good qualities in those around you and help to develop them. What is lost, I feel like, and I have this conversation with my 21-year-old son, is the ability to find the good in other people, to be a good person and to find the good in other people, and stop being so quick to judge everybody because of what you are seeing across social media platforms and everything else. So if you slow down while developing your fundamentals, then you're going to see good in people, but you're also going to see what good leadership is and isn't in other people, and adopt some of what's good and make it your own and perfect it, and stay away from what's not good.
And I'll just add, one of the things that we were talking about when we talked earlier this week is looking ahead of not just what that particular goal is, but really taking, I think you used the term, a 360 view.
Yeah.
And to understand not only what happens if I do X, but then the next step and the next step and the next step. We talk, there's a thing, if you drop a rock into the water, there's ripples that go out. And a good leader is someone who will look at those ripples as they go out, and the impact not only on your, let's say a particular goal, a particular project or whatever, but how those things can interact with others, with other factors. And understanding the external factors that you may not have control over that will also influence that. So you have to begin thinking not just step 1, but step 2, step 3, step 4, and how do these things integrate? Because sometimes it may not, it's not necessarily going to change what your goal or function is, but it may either say, I need to include this person, or I need to include this group in this conversation. In the environmental context, we often talk about the civil rights community, in the environmental community, didn't talk to each other for most of their existence. They're still having a difficult time talking to each other now.
We're working
but
on
at least, yeah, but at least there's some conversation. And so just that, kind of thinking beyond just what you can see, and learning to ask yourself, interrogate yourself, ask yourself questions about, if this happens, then what?
And it's literally, when new people come, newer officers come, or even when I was a prosecutor and newer prosecutors come and say, I want to do this. And I say, and what about, and after you do that, what about this, and this, and this, and this? And invariably somebody will say, all right, God, I didn't think about that. You have to, right? Because every action has a reaction, everything has a consequence. And that's the part about slowing down. Because if you're slowing down and finding the good and the good leadership qualities in other folks, it'll be the person, the leader that you go to and say, here's my issue. That person will invariably force you to start thinking about all of the other attendant issues that might come up. And after you've thought about all of those, then this and that, right? That's the kind of the mark of a good strategist, bless you, and leader. Somebody who comes not only with the issue, but the solution that is many steps down the field.
Well, I think we need to begin to wind up because we have food and drink outside, and I think perhaps the sign of a good leader is knowing how to get people to food and drink, a real conversation and community to continue. But maybe just in the last moment, do you have one or two, I won't make the rules too stringent, just pieces of advice, something that you wish that you had known when you were starting your career or that you'd thought about it, whether it's taking care of yourself or listening? And what is the thing that you think you really want, especially our students, to hear and to hold on to as they start their careers?
The problem will be there tomorrow. And don't forget what matters most, which is yourself and the people that you love around you. I spent way too much time in my development away from home, missing out on central parts of my son and my daughter's growth, that if I could do it again and realize that the problem will be there tomorrow, I would have been home for those things.
You never accomplish anything by yourself.
Yeah.
You accomplish small things, you may accomplish steps, but the best things that you will ever accomplish in life are done with others. And so not worrying about whether you get credit for what you've done. Think about, the legacy you'll leave and the difference that you'll make, not the accolades that you may receive or the attention that may come with it.
I want to foot stomp, double click all of that, and just say the detour may actually be the path.
I'm going to let those words resonate and just say a huge thank you to our panelists. It's just incredible conversation.
I almost said an amen on that.
Yes, Lord.
And now I'm going to invite you for food and drinks to the reception, so hopefully you can all join.
No part of me thought I would.
That was amazing.
Use it, Mike.